We're restructuring the engineering division, Richard. I'm afraid your position has been eliminated, said Malcolm Pierce, our CEO of just 18 months. He maintained steady eye contact, a technique I suspected he'd learned in some executive coaching seminar. Beside him sat Imogen from Human Resources, clutching a folder labeled with my name, her expression carefully neutral. I simply nodded. I understand. My name is Richard Harrington, 58 years old, and until that Friday morning, I was the chief bridge engineer at Westbrook Infrastructure Group in London. For over 2 decades, I had designed and overseen the construction of bridges across 3 continents, structures that would outlive me by centuries. From the early CAD days to modern 3D simulation models, I'd navigated every technological shift while remaining the company's most reliable asset. I'd seen this coming for months, the way executives suddenly went quiet when I entered rooms, how my emails about critical design concerns received increasingly delayed responses. The air around me had changed, growing thinner, less supportive. Malcolm seemed taken aback by my calm. He'd prepared for protests, perhaps even anger. Instead, he got measured acceptance. Westbrook appreciates your years of service, he continued, regaining his composure. The severance package is quite generous. I took the envelope Imogen offered, but didn't open it. When would you like me to leave? Today would be best, Imogen replied, glancing at Malcolm. For a clean transition. I nodded again and stood. 22 years concluded in a 7-minute meeting. As I walked back to my office, I felt dozens of eyes following me. News travels at light speed in engineering departments. My team, 14 brilliant structural engineers I'd personally mentored, looked up as I entered, their faces showing various stages of disbelief. Rebecca, my deputy of 12 years, immediately came to my door. Is it true? Yes, I said simply. They're restructuring. Her eyes narrowed. This is about the Millennium Bridge project, isn't it? They're bringing in that consultancy firm, Thornton Global. I didn't confirm or deny, just began collecting my personal items. Family photos. The bridge models I'd 3D printed. The worn copy of Structures or Why Things Don't Fall Down that had traveled with me to every major project since university. What Rebecca didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my concerns about the Millennium Bridge went far deeper than I'd expressed in meetings. The £220 million signature project spanning the Thames was Westbrook's largest contract in its history, a design that would define London's skyline for generations. And it had fundamental flaws that the new management was refusing to address. Charles from the adjacent engineering team approached as I was packing. This is outrageous, Richard. You practically built this company. I gave him a small smile. Companies evolve, Charles. Sometimes they shed what they no longer understand. As I left the building, Malcolm watched from the upper floor balcony, not waving, not nodding, just ensuring I actually departed. 22 years of loyalty, hundreds of successful projects, and they couldn't even trust me to leave on my own. What Malcolm and the board didn't grasp was that I hadn't simply designed bridges for Westbrook. I had architected their entire engineering workflow. Every database, every approval protocol, every safety redundancy had my fingerprints embedded in its structure. Not because I craved control, but because I was thorough. I documented everything meticulously. Not just the visible specifications, but the underlying assumptions, the maintenance requirements, the micro-decisions that determined whether a structure would last 50 years or 500. These weren't just bridges, they were my legacy. I drove home in silence, the London traffic crawling along as I processed what had happened. By the time I pulled into my driveway in Richmond, my initial shock had transformed into something colder, more focused. Margaret, my wife of 30 years, was waiting in the kitchen. One look at my face, and she knew. They finally did it, didn't they? I nodded, setting my box of belongings on the counter. Bloody fools, she said, pouring me a cup of tea. After 3 decades with an engineer, she understood structural integrity, applied to careers as well as bridges. That evening, we sat in our garden as dusk settled over London. "What will you do?" Margaret asked. "I'm not entirely sure yet," I replied honestly. What I didn't tell her was that I'd been preparing for this possibility for months, not actively sabotaging anything. That wasn't my nature, but ensuring I had copies of every critical document, every correspondence where I'd raised concerns about the Millennium Bridge design. When the legal team had implemented a new document management system 2 years ago, they'd authorized certain executives to maintain secure backups. As chief engineer, I was on that list. They'd simply forgotten to revoke that authorization during the restructuring. The following morning, I reviewed those files in my home office. I wasn't looking for revenge, I was looking for protection. Westbrook had pushed me out just as the Millennium Bridge project was entering its most critical phase. When problems inevitably emerged, and I needed to prove I'd warned them. Among the documents was an email thread from 3 months earlier, where I'd expressed serious concerns about the bridge's resonance frequency calculations. The Thames estuary's unique tidal patterns created wind conditions that could potentially trigger harmonic oscillation in the design. Thornton Global was advocating. I'd recommended additional dampening systems that would add £6 million to the budget. Malcolm had personally overruled me. The models show acceptable tolerance ranges. Thornton assures me the safety margin is more than adequate. The additional expense isn't justified. I'd countered with historical examples: the Tacoma Narrows disaster, the Millennium Bridge in London that had to be closed and retrofitted shortly after opening due to unexpected swaying. Malcolm had dismissed these as irrelevant to our next-generation design. As I continued through the files, a pattern emerged. Every decision where I'd advocated for additional safety or structural redundancy had been overruled in favor of cost savings or aesthetic considerations. Thornton Global had promised to deliver the bridge under budget while maintaining the bold visual statement the city council wanted. My phone buzzed, a text from Rebecca: "They're announcing your replacement Monday." Some hotshot from Thornton named James Fletcher, 36 years old. More awards than experience. I didn't respond. No need to drag Rebecca into what was coming. Sunday evening, I received an unexpected email from Harold Winters, one of Westbrook's board members, and an old colleague from my early days. "Richard, can we meet privately? There are aspects to your departure I'm not comfortable with." We met at a small pub in Greenwich the following afternoon. Harold looked older than his 65 years, the weight of corporate politics evident in his posture. "The board wasn't unanimous in this decision," he said after we'd settled with our drinks. 3 of us voted against it, but Malcolm made a compelling case for modernizing the engineering approach. And the fact that my safety recommendations would have added £12 million to the Millennium Bridge budget had nothing to do with it, I asked. Harold had the decency to look uncomfortable. Malcolm presented Thornton's analysis showing your concerns were overly cautious. I took a sip of my beer. The same Thornton that now has one of their people in my position. "I know how it looks," Harold admitted. "But the contract specifications won't matter when the bridge starts exhibiting harmonic oscillation under specific wind and pedestrian load conditions," I finished for him. Harold's eyes narrowed. "How severe are we talking about?" "Severe enough that you'll need to close it for extensive retrofitting within the first year. Not collapse-level failure, if that's what you're asking, but definitely international embarrassment level." Harold rubbed his face. "Malcolm assured us the risk assessments were calculated using standard conditions, not the specific tidal and wind patterns of that section of the Thames." I pulled out my tablet and showed him my simulations. "This isn't theoretical, Harold. It's math." As Harold left, he paused. "What are you planning to do with this information, Richard?" "Nothing for now," I said honestly. "But I've documented every safety concern I raised and every time it was dismissed, just in case." 3 weeks passed. I reviewed my severance package substantial, consulted with a solicitor precautionary, and declined 4 job offers from competing firms, unnecessary. I could retire comfortably. I wasn't interested in starting over elsewhere. This wasn't about my career anymore. Then Graham Watson, my former assistant, called. "Richard, they've modified your original foundation designs for the North Tower. Fletcher convinced Malcolm it would save 8 weeks on the construction timeline. What specifically did they change? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Reduced the pilings from 36 to 24, using a different alloy that Thornton claims has superior tensile strength. I closed my eyes briefly. The North Tower foundation had been designed with the specific sediment composition of that section of riverbed in mind. The number of pilings wasn't arbitrary. It was calculated based on soil compression tests I'd personally overseen. "Thanks for letting me know, Graham. There's more," he said, lowering his voice. "They're accelerating the timeline. Malcolm wants the bridge partially open for a press event before the fiscal year ends. They're skipping some of the vibration testing phases." After we hung up, I sat in my garden for a long time, watching the wind move through the trees, thinking about forces, resistance, and breaking points. 2 months later, construction on the Millennium Bridge reached the stage where the central span was being connected to the North Tower. Westbrook's PR department had been releasing weekly progress updates, each one highlighting how the innovative approach of their new engineering team had kept the project ahead of schedule and under budget. I'd maintained my silence, watching from a distance as my concerns were systematically validated in the project data. Graham occasionally shared with me. The foundation settling measurements were already showing irregularities. Nothing catastrophic yet, but trending in concerning directions. Then Harold called. "Richard, we need to talk. Privately. Tonight, if possible." We met at his club in Mayfair, a quiet wood-paneled room where discretion was part of the service. "There are problems with the bridge," he said, without preamble. "What kind of problems?" "Unexplained vibration during preliminary load testing. Slight but measurable displacement in the North Tower foundation. Inconsistent stress readings across the central span." Exactly what I had predicted. "And how is Mr. Fletcher explaining these issues?" Harold's expression tightened. "He's attributing them to expected settling and calibration anomalies in the monitoring equipment." I nodded. "And you're coming to me because I've been on enough engineering projects to know when I'm being managed rather than informed." Harold leaned forward. "The committee overseeing the project for the city council has started asking questions. Fletcher responds with technical jargon that sounds reassuring but doesn't actually address their concerns." "What does Malcolm say?" "Malcolm is focused on the opening ceremony. The mayor will be there, along with international press. It's all about optics now." I took a sip of my whiskey. "What exactly you're asking me to do, Harold?" "Come back as a consultant, review the data, help us understand how serious these issues really are." I set down my glass. "You fired me, Harold. You and the board. You disregarded my safety concerns. You replaced me with someone who told you what you wanted to hear rather than what you needed to know. And now that the consequences are becoming apparent, you want me to help clean up the mess?" Harold had the decency to look ashamed. "I know we don't deserve your help, Richard, but think of the public. Think of London." "I am thinking of London," I replied. "That's why I documented every safety warning I issued, and every time it was ignored. If that bridge opens before proper testing and remediation, those documents go to the city council, the press, and my solicitor." Harold's face paled. "You'd destroy the company?" "I'd prevent a potential disaster," I corrected him. "I may not work for Westbrook anymore, but I still have professional ethics." The next morning my home phone rang, a number few people had. It was Malcolm. "Richard, I understand you spoke with Harold last night." I did. "He says you're threatening to go public with concerns about the Millennium Bridge project." "Not threatening, Malcolm. Promising. If that bridge opens before the vibration issues and foundation settling are properly addressed, I will share my documentation with every relevant authority." A pause. "You signed a confidentiality agreement as part of your severance package, which specifically excludes matters of public safety. Clause 14, paragraph 3. I had my solicitor review it quite carefully." Another, longer pause. "What would it take to bring you in as a consultant to review the current status?" "Full access to all project data, authority to order any testing I deem necessary, no interference from Fletcher or his team, and a public announcement that Westbrook is bringing me back to ensure the highest safety standards. That's not reasonable. Neither is opening a compromised bridge to pedestrian traffic. Your choice, Malcolm. 3 days later, Westbrook issued a press release. Westbrook Infrastructure Group is pleased to announce that Richard Harrington, former chief bridge engineer, will be rejoining the Millennium Bridge project as special engineering consultant to ensure the company's commitment to uncompromising safety standards. The engineering department erupted in barely concealed celebration when I walked back through the doors the following Monday. Rebecca hugged me. Graham grinned from ear to ear. Even Charles, usually reserved, clapped me on the shoulder. James Fletcher, my replacement, was conspicuously absent from the welcome committee. I spent the first week reviewing all test data and simulation results since my departure. The situation was concerning, but not yet critical. The North Tower Foundation was indeed showing signs of differential settlement, exactly as I'd predicted given the reduced pilings. The central span was exhibiting resonance frequencies dangerously close to what could cause harmonic oscillation under specific wind conditions. In the project status meeting that Friday, I laid out my findings without embellishment. The bridge as currently constructed is not safe for public use. It requires significant modifications before it can be opened. Malcolm's face tightened. How significant? Additional pilings for the North Tower Foundation. Enhanced dampening systems throughout the central span, reinforced connection points at both towers, comprehensive vibration testing under various load and wind conditions. Timeline, Malcolm asked, his voice strained. 6 months minimum, potentially 9. Cost, approximately £18 million. The room fell silent. Finally, Fletcher spoke up. These modifications are excessive. My team believes we can address the issues with targeted reinforcements at a fraction of the cost and time. I turned to him. Your team's beliefs aren't supported by the data. The North Tower is already showing 4.3 millimeters of differential settlement. The central span's resonance frequency is within 0.8 Hz of potential harmonic oscillation under expected pedestrian loads. Statistical anomalies, Fletcher insisted. Well within acceptable parameters for a project of this scale. I pulled up the simulation I'd prepared. This is what happens when 1,000 pedestrians cross your bridge during a 15-knot wind from the southeast, a common condition on that stretch of the Thames. The visualization showed the bridge developing an alarming lateral sway, growing in amplitude with each cycle. That's an extreme scenario, Fletcher protested. That's a Tuesday afternoon in October, I countered. I have 22 years of weather and river data to back it up. The debate continued for another hour, but the visualization had done its job. Even Malcolm could see the potential for disaster and, more importantly, the potential liability. We implement Richard's recommendations, he finally declared. Full stop. The modifications took 8 months and cost £22 million, exceeding even my estimates. The press event with the mayor was postponed twice. Westbrook's stock price took a hit. The board held an emergency session where, according to Harold, Malcolm faced severe questioning about his management of the project. Throughout this period, I worked 6-day weeks overseeing every aspect of the remediation. Not because I felt any loyalty to Westbrook, but because I felt a responsibility to London and to every person who would ever cross that bridge. The day before the rescheduled opening ceremony, Malcolm called me into his office. His usual confident demeanor had eroded over the months, replaced by something more cautious, perhaps even humble. The board has asked me to offer you your position back, he said, without preamble. Chief engineer, with an expanded role overseeing all quality and safety protocols company-wide. I didn't respond immediately, letting the moment stretch. We made a mistake, Richard, Malcolm continued, filling the silence. We prioritized the wrong metrics. We listened to the wrong people. And Fletcher, returning to Thornton Global, effective immediately. I nodded slowly. What about the other safety concerns I raised before my departure? The reinforcement specifications for the Glasgow project. The foundation design for the Cardiff development. Malcolm slid a folder across his desk. Full authorization to implement whatever changes you deem necessary. The board has approved a discretionary safety budget under your direct control. And my reporting structure, directly to the board, independent of project management considerations. I took the folder but didn't open it. I'll need 24 hours to consider the offer. That evening, Margaret and I discussed it over dinner in our garden. The summer evening was perfect, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of her roses. They need you more than you need them, she observed. True, I acknowledged. But that bridge needs you more than either, she added with the insight of someone who had watched me fuss over structural calculations for 3 decades. The following morning, I walked into the Westbrook offices wearing a suit I rarely used. The security guard nodded with obvious approval. Welcome back, Mr. Harrington. In the executive conference room, the entire board awaited my decision. Harold gave me a small smile as I entered. I've reviewed your offer, I said, addressing the room. I'm prepared to accept with additional conditions. Malcolm nodded. We expected as much. What are they? I placed my own folder on the table. Full audit authority across all current and future projects. Veto power over any design changes that impact structural integrity or safety margins. A dedicated team reporting directly to me with its own budget and resources. The board chairman raised his eyebrows. That's unprecedented authority for a chief engineer. So is having to rebuild a £220 million bridge before it even opens. I replied evenly. You're not hiring me back as an engineer. You're hiring me as insurance against your own worst impulses. The room fell silent as they absorbed this. Finally, Malcolm spoke. The terms are acceptable. When can you start? I already have. The revised testing protocol for the bridge opening is in your email. I'll need confirmation it's been implemented before I sign anything. As I left the meeting, Rebecca was waiting outside. Does this mean what I think it means? I allowed myself a small smile. It means the grown-ups are back in charge of the building blocks. 6 months later, I stood on the completed Millennium Bridge as the first public pedestrians streamed across. The additional dampening systems work perfectly. The bridge remained stable and secure even as thousands of people traversed its span. From a distance, the modifications were invisible. The bridge appeared exactly as the original renderings had promised, a sleek modern structure worthy of its prominent location. Malcolm joined me at the center of the bridge, watching the crowds with evident relief. The mayor is extremely pleased, he said. Called it a triumph of British engineering. It is, I agreed. Though not the way he imagines. Malcolm glanced at me. The board reviewed the final project numbers yesterday. Even with the remediation costs, we'll show a profit. Because we avoided a disaster that would have cost 10 times more to fix after the fact, I pointed out. Yes, well. Malcolm cleared his throat. Lesson learned. As we walked back toward the South Bank, he asked, do you ever regret not going public? You could have destroyed us, made an example of the company. I stopped, looking out over the Thames. For centuries this river had flowed past human achievements and human follies alike, indifferent to our victories and failures. Bridges aren't built to make statements, Malcolm. They're built to connect things that would otherwise remain separate. Destroying serves no purpose when you can build instead. Later that afternoon, I returned to my expanded office where my old team, now doubled in size, awaited my review of 3 new project proposals. Through the window, I could see the Millennium Bridge in the distance, busy with pedestrians solid and secure. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Saw the bridge on the news. Beautiful. Sturdy? I smiled and replied. Sturdy enough to outlast all of us, as it should be. Some structures collapse under poor design. Others, properly reinforced, stand for generations. The same is true of careers, companies, and reputations. As an engineer, I'd always understood that the most elegant solution isn't destroying a flawed structure, but reinforcing it, transforming weakness into strength. Westbrook had nearly collapsed under the weight of its own hubris, but we'd rebuilt it, better and stronger. And that was the most satisfying project of my career.